Hello and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the East Coast of the United States. In some episodes, we'll focus on passages and destinations. In our other episodes, we will talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And when we come across an interesting person, we'll try to get them as a guest on the show. But before we dive into this episode, we need to say a special thank you to our supporters. Several listeners are supporting the podcast via Patreon. If you would like to join them, you can go to patreon.com/sailingtheeast.
Bela, great to see you, and great to see, I don't know, we don't really see the listeners, but thanks for being there and thanks for supporting us. Bela, it's January here in the western part of Germany, still pretty cold. So as I am all winter, I'm looking forward to some conversation about sailing can help warm us up a little bit. Fill me in. Who's our guest today?
Yeah, as I sit here, Mike, in January, it is snowing outside. We probably have 4 or 5 inches on the snow, and it's, I think, 19 degrees here in upstate New York. So that's 19 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be probably five below
ish. Yeah.
5 below centigrade.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
So today's guest is Mark Teizen. So Mark is a repeat guest. He was a guest in episodes 79 and 80. And that was a story about how he and his friend were out sailing and they were coming into a harbor and they hit bottom and their rudder jammed and they lost the ability to steer the boat. And they ended up being washed up on shore. So that was quite the adventure, and literally washed up on shore, and they were able to get off the boat. Nobody was hurt, and they ended up drawing quite a crowd. And so this is sort of the story about what happened after that and the repair of the boat, because it did have a bit of damage to the boat, particularly the keel. So it's a great story and a couple of good lessons in here.
Yeah, for sure. I remember Mark, and this was an amazing story, and it really gave me chills in a lot of ways. But I'm interested to hear the follow-up. And I think as you've kind of implied, there's a happy ending to this story. So let's get right into your interview with Mark Teizen.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Very good. Very good.
Good to see you again.
You
now,
too.
You were on a podcast before, and we were talking about an event at that time, which was maybe not so pleasant. So remind our listeners in a few sentences, sort of what happened.
So we were coming into a inlet that we had been in multiple times before, but it was very wavy. We were getting, 4-foot rollers, and we probably cut the corner a little closer than we should have. And in the bottom of one of those rollers, we hit something. I assume we hit the bottom. It could have been a rock. The rudder locked over, and we could not steer. The emergency tiller didn't work. It was a very narrow channel. And within several minutes, we had washed across the one inlet, across the middle of the channel, across the other inlet, bouncing on that, and ended up on the beach.
Yeah. And this was, remind our listeners where this was.
This is in Florida. So this happened to be Longboat Pass that we were coming into.
Yeah, and your boat is a Catalina 45, if I remember correctly.
445, yes.
445, excuse me. Yeah. So there you are, washed up on the beach, so to speak. And take us through a quick summary. What happened next?
So, when we first got washed up on the beach, the boat was very unstable. Every time one of these big waves hit it, the whole boat kind of rocked around, and we didn't feel very comfortable being on there. So we gathered up about as much stuff as we thought we needed, and we were only in, at this point, 1.5 foot of water off the stern. So they actually went in stern first into the beach, which made it very easy for us to get out. Then we had already called a towboat, and they were on their way. By this time, the looky-loos were starting to gather. Somebody had even called the EMTs to come check on us to make sure nobody was injured. And the towboat people got there within a very reasonable amount of time, half hour, 40 minutes, something like that. But it was too wavy for them to get close to us. So there was a couple that lived on the beach who took pity on us, and we gathered some more stuff off the boat. Went to their place, changed clothes, ended up finding a hotel for that night. And then the next couple of days were just kind of logistics. The wind and the waves stayed steady for another day and a half, and the towboat people didn't think that they would be able to come out and get us. So finally, at the end of around 4 p.m. was high tide, and they wanted to try to pull us off at high tide. The waves had come down enough where they could get to us. They brought two boats out, hooked us up once in tandem, two boats off the bow, didn't really move us. And then the second boat moved his attachment to the stern, and then they had one boat on the bow and one boat on the stern. And but by this time we had quite a crowd that had gathered there. All of them, taking cell phone videos, which I have resisted the temptation to go look for any of those posted. But eventually, 40 minutes of them pulling and readjusting and changing the angle a little bit, and they finally got us off. Pulled me in the boat off. And so now it's about 5 o'clock, and this is in January, and so it's starting to get dark and it's starting to get cold. And now it's about a 3 to 4 hour tow back to my home marina. One of the things I didn't recognize about this is that being towed is a very active process on your part. I had it in my head that I could just sit there and they would tow me and I wouldn't have to do anything. But no, I had to steer the entire time. Now, luckily, the rudder had come loose. The sand and the beach and whatnot had unlocked it. I think what had happened is it just got slammed underneath the hull and got stuck there. So I could steer, but it was 3 to 4 hours of steering right behind the towboat. We couldn't use your autopilot. And one of the mistakes I made was that I sent my partner, Alan, back to the car so that he could drive to the marina, which meant I was doing this alone, which in retrospect was a mistake. Because now it's getting cold and I have to go get a coat. I want to check on the bilge, and I wanted something to eat, and then I had to use the restroom. And every time that happened, we, I had to talk to the towboat in front of me, and then he would slow down, and I would go do my thing and come back, and then he would speed up again. So we went up the ICW. Luckily, there wasn't much traffic. There were 3 bridges that we had to get through. All 3 of the bridge tenders were very understanding and got us through without any problem. Once we got very close to the marina, then they change you from a tow to what they call a hip tow. So they move the boat back, they move the towboat back so that its stern is aligned to your stern. Tie off there and then tie off at, essentially midship on my boat. And now the towboat operator tells you, okay, so now I'm propulsion and you're steerage, which was not a very comforting thing. because now I had to steer the boat and not only keep me out of danger, but I had to keep him out of danger. He's sticking out off of my starboard side. And now it's dark. Now it's 8 o'clock at night. I've actually never come in to my home marina at night. I've always done it during the day. But luckily, Alan was there on the dock with a flashlight to, ensure that we got to the right place. We had a little bit of trouble. We'd like to come stern in, and he had a little bit of trouble turning us, and we kind of touched another boat as we came in. We didn't do any damage, but we certainly did rile up the owners of that boat. Now there's several people on the dock giving us advice, which of course was none of that was useful at all. But then we finally got the boat settled in, and I got the towboat guy on his way. And now it's about 9 o'clock at night. And initially, I plugged in the boat and turned everything on. But then we were going to go back to the hotel to sleep that night and then move back on the boat in the morning. And we got about 20 minutes away from the boat. And I suddenly realized, you know what? I don't know that I want the boat plugged in overnight after this whole ordeal. So we drove back, left it plugged in, but turned off all the power so that if something was going to happen, it was going to happen while we were on the boat and not when it was being unattended. Moved back on the boat the next day. The next 4 days were just testing things out, testing systems. We had our diver come and dive the boat and look at the rudder. And it was banged up, the paint and whatnot was banged up. The keel was banged up, but everything looked solid. The prop looked fine. We took the impeller off and made sure there wasn't any sand any place. Started the motor, tested all the electronics, tested the generator, filled up all 3 water tanks, make sure we didn't have a water tank leak. And we could see cracks in the bottom of the bilge that weren't there before. And we just had a very small leak, one of those, put a paper towel down and 3 hours later, there's a little water on it. So we weren't in danger of sinking, but obviously we had done some major damage. After our 4 days, we felt pretty comfortable that everything was fine. We had talked to the boatyard that I have used in the past, and it's about 4 hours away. We picked a nice calm day because we were going to go up on Friday, but Friday was going to be windy, so we left on Thursday. Very calm, nice, gentle motor, because I could, imagine what would happen if I tried to go at full throttle and ripped the keel the rest of the way off the boat. We didn't want that to happen. So we got to the boatyard, and everything was fine, and they hauled us out and started the work.
All right. And so what was the insurance piece of this like?
Yeah, it was interesting. I have Geico Marine, and I'll say up front that I was very impressed, very happy with them. You did almost everything over the phone through the app. I don't think I ever talked to a person during this. And the first part was a little strange. They sent you this link about starting a claim, and they don't send adjusters out anymore. So I had to take all the pictures. So they wanted pictures, and this wasn't about the damage. This was just about identifying the boat. So they wanted pictures of the stern and the bow and the port side and the starboard side and the VIN number and all that kind of thing. There was about a dozen different pictures that I had to take, upload them to the app, tell them, what had happened, and told them where I was taking it. you know, they said, okay, well then the next step is to get it to the boatyard and get us a estimate. And when I had talked to him, when I talked to the boatyard my guy the first time, he gave me a very gentle estimate of what it would cost to drop the keel and do some of the stuff, but we didn't know exactly how extensive the damage was. So Geico approved and you know, started the process of payment that estimate almost immediately. And then once the boatyard had a more extensive estimate, and it's, I bet it's 16 pages of estimate of things. Yeah, you know, because they break everything out in a lot of detail, you know, down to this particular boatyard breaks down what person is going to do what work, and they charge at a different rate. Some people are apparently better workers than others, or more highly skilled than others, or whatnot. So it's a very detailed analysis, which apparently Geico really appreciated because they accepted it. I think what Geico paid and what the marina estimated, or the boatyard estimated, was like $200 difference. So that part went very smoothly, much more smoothly than I would.
Yeah. Excellent. So they fixed the boat.
They fixed the boat.
Right. So the good news is they fixed the boat. And then sort of what happens? They say, okay, the boat's all fixed. Now what?
Yeah. So we dropped it off on February 2nd, and we picked up the boat on June 19th.
Oh, wow. So it was a while.
About 4.5 months. And the boatyard guy is very good, but he always ducked the question about when it was going to be ready. He would not commit to that.
Yeah.
But we got it ready, and there were a few phone calls, a few things that he had to discuss. Should we fix this way, or should we fix this that way, or how did you have it before? Those kind of things. But for the most part, it was pretty much on autopilot, so to speak. So we showed up at the marina on June 19th. And one of the things that the guy at the boatyard was very insistent upon is that we didn't go very far the first couple of days. He didn't want us to go all the way back to our marina. He wanted us to give it a sea trial in the bay, so that, because he knew that there were going to be things that they missed. Apparently with that kind of repair that happens. So we booked a slip at St. Pete, just about 20 minutes away from the boatyard, which he was very happy about. And we motored over there. We spent the first day just going through the boat. Of course, they had taken, they had to take most of the stuff off the boat. And then when they put it back on the boat, they didn't put it in the right place. So a lot of our first day was just rearranging things and putting things back in the right place, checking out all the systems, starting the motor, starting the generator, checking all the electronics, doing all that kind of stuff. But there was one system that we forgot, and I'll leave that for a second because it's a involved story. The only two things that we found that weren't immediately that we found that needed repair was when they put the bilge back together. My bilge has a front section and a rear section, and then blanking on the word. There's a divider in between there that has a nautical term, which I'm blanking on, a striker or a strut.
The pass through, so the water can get between the two.
Well,
bilges?
That's what they forgot to do. They forgot to put the lumber hole in that
lumber hole
support.
Yeah.
And both of my bilge pumps are in the stern part of the bilge, and so any water that was going to get in the forward part was going to have to wait until it overflowed to get actually to a bilge pump. And then we had bent the emergency tiller, and they had fixed it, but it still wasn't quite right. So we called them up. They said, oh yeah, just come by. We came by, they fixed the emergency tiller. They drilled a hole in the bilge. They had it for about an hour is all that took them. And we were ready to go. So the next day we took off to go sailing, because we hadn't had the sails up yet. And the first thing we found was that the riggers, when they had put the mast in, because they had to unstep the mast, when they'd put it back on, I have an in-boom furler for the mainsail, and they had wrapped up the furling line all the way on the drum, even though the sail was down. And so when we got out there and we're checking the lines and starting to put the sail up, something wasn't right. Well, this line's too short. This line's supposed to be long, because it's supposed to. So we had to throw out an anchor, sit there for about an hour, because it's the way this in-boom system works is that the furler is attached to the mainsail that you can't disengage. And so to unwind the furler, you have to do it by hand. And it's only a quarter of the drum that's open. So you have to feed that line in and pull it out and whatnot. But if that's the worst thing we found, we were going to live with that. Took a 2-day sail. Everything was fine. We didn't find any problems. Went back to the home marina. And now, it's June. Now it's time for us to decommission our boat, because we don't sail during the summer. It's too hot and humid. So we prepped it for hurricane season, which is what we do every season, and then left the boat and didn't come back until end of September. I think it was beginning of October. Well, I was due for a upgrade with my chart plotter. The Admiral says I wanted it. I said I needed it. It had already been budgeted for, so we got our boat guy to install the chart plotter. And of course, these projects always get more out of control than you think they're going to. I found someplace online that somebody had done this. My chart plotter was quite old. It's a Ray Marine, but it was quite old. And when they had upgraded their chart plotter, and so we decided, well, we'll change the autopilot at the same time. So we got a new chart plotter, got a new autopilot. Now we're back in. And then the boat guy calls me and says, I can't get your radar to work. Did it work after the incident? And of course, that was the one system that I had not turned on.
Yeah.
So I could not honestly say whether it had worked or not. And so we worked through, is this a compatibility issue? And the guy, what he had to do was take the radar dome physically off of the mast. Ours is about halfway up the mast. Bring it down to the new chart plotter, and then physically connect it with a small, short wire, and then it worked fine. So clearly there was a problem with the wire from so I learned a lot about radar cables that I didn't know before. So, the radar cable, like a lot of your cables, connects into the back of your electrical panel, runs into the bilge, goes through the mast post, up the mast, and up the inside of the mast, and then connects to the radar dome. Right? Seems very straightforward. And there's lots of other wires there, right? There's the lights on top of the mast, the wind instruments are there. So there's lots of wires in there. The difference, however, is that all of those lines all have plugs on them that terminate at the base of the mast. So I'm guessing most boats are like this. There's a little access panel there. You open up that access panel, you unplug all these little plugs, and then you can take the mast off. And when you put the mast back on, you plug all these little things back in. Well, the radar is different. And I stumbled onto a huge controversy about radar cables. So I'll ask you, Bela, does your boat have a splice in its radar cable?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's got a splice or it's one piece. I know there's a terminal block at my foot of the mast for
Okay.
all the other connections, but I can't now. You got my curiosity going, so I will take a look at that when I'm back at the boat.
So apparently it's quite the controversy about whether you splice a radar cable or not. The radar cable is different than the other cables. It's a much more robust cable. It's about the size of your pinky. And it's a very sturdy cable. But inside of it are several wires that are for the power for the radar dome, and then an Ethernet cable. So you remember what an Ethernet cable looks like. It's got that funny plug on each end, and then it's got those 9 tiny wires that are inside. So if you do splice your radar cable, you've got all of these, 10, 12 wires have to get in the right place. And it took my guy and me a long time to figure out what the problem was with this radar cable. Well, apparently I did have a splice. I had a pre-existing splice there. And when the yard put it back together, they did the split. The yard uses an outside people to do the rigging. And when the riggers put the mast back on, they redid the splice, but they didn't do a very good job. And it essentially just fell apart. So when we finally found it, half of the wires had already pulled out. And the boatyard person said that splices in the radar cable are very common. My guy said that you should never splice the radar cable. It's just, it impedes the integrity of the signal. And so when I did my internet research and talked to the forums and talked to the blogs, it was about a 50-50 split between whether people thought that was a good idea or not. So if you think about it, if it's a solid wire that goes from your electrical panel through your bilge up to your radar, you have to disconnect it from one of those ends.
Yeah, that's a pain.
Pull it back through.
Yeah.
So my guy said it was very routine for him to just go up to the radar panel, disconnect that wire, pull it down through the mast back into the bilge. All the other wires disconnect, and then they would unstep the mast.
Yeah.
I found one very interesting long forum about this, where a guy asked this question: should I have a splice in my cable? And there were 12 responses, and all 12 of them were exactly the same. No, you shouldn't have a splice. But if you do have a splice, do it my way. And they had 12 different ways that they would do it.
Yeah.
So apparently we agree that we shouldn't do it, and we agree that everybody does do it, I think is the bottom line.
And they do it their way.
Yeah, their way. That's right. It's got to be their way, or else
good.
it won't work at all.
So it sounds like in the long run, everything sort of worked out okay.
Yes. Alan and I took a very long sail in October after we got the radar cable patched up. 19 days we sailed around the Gulf coast. Didn't have any issues with the boat at all. So
well, that's wonderful.
I think
that's wonderful. So can you share with us the name of the boatyard that did this work?
Yeah, it's Elite Marine. It's in St. Petersburg. It's right off of Salt Creek. It's called. Carl is the yard manager, and I would have no hesitation in sending anybody there. He knows what he's doing. He does a very good job. I am sure he's not the cheapest place in town, but anytime that something has gone wrong, that he hasn't done quite right, he's always owned up to it and fixed it without hesitation and without costing me anything. So,
yeah, no, that's great. Well, I'm so happy that it all sort of worked out for you, right? Because it's sort of the nightmare scenario. It's the scenario I have nightmares about.
absolutely.
Is, losing steerage or losing power and then ending up on the beach. And but it sounds like the whole thing worked out not all that bad. Could have been a lot worse. Yeah.
And the other nightmare that I kept having, even after we was in the yard and whatnot, is if they find something unfixable and they have to total the boat. I had done so many things to that boat to make it ours over the 10 years that we've owned it, that it was, even if I bought the exact same boat, it was going to take me forever to get it back to where, and when they total it, they're not going to pay you for all the extra things you have.
No.
We have an arch on the back, which we didn't have before, those kind of things. So I did have that nightmare many times until Carl finally called and said it was ready.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to give us the update on your adventure. That was super. What plans you have? Any long distance sailing plans?
Not this year, I don't think. We're in Minnesota right now. We plan to go back to Florida in January. And we'll definitely do some sailing, but I don't think that we're going to do any long distance things this year. Yeah. We have Bahamas on our bucket list for next January is our plan. So,
well, that's great. Great. Hey, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to give us an update. I really appreciate it. It was a good way to kind of close out this story. Initially I looked it up. You were in episode 79 and 80.
Okay.
So if listeners want to hear about much more detail about what happened and sort of the lessons you learned from that experience, that was in episode 79 and 80. So thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast again.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Bela, interesting interview, great story. In general, just thinking about the whole process of repairing a boat like this scares me a lot. But what scared me even more was this whole towing process that he described. But it all worked out okay, didn't it?
Yes, it did. It turned out wonderful. I will tell you, I've been towed once. It was my son, Andy, and his wife and I were on a charter down in Tampa Bay, Florida. And we sailed out into the Gulf and the wind died and it went to start the engine and it wouldn't start. And it was a charter boat. So we called the charter company. They called a tow company and they came out and towed us in. And it was kind of interesting because you're just sort of along for the ride and there's not much to do. And I think with Mark, it was even more interesting because he sort of has a boat and the steering capabilities are not known. But I tell you, those towboat operators, the one that I experienced, and I've seen a fair number on Narragansett Bay, probably almost every time I go out sailing, I see somebody getting towed. And so it's a pretty common thing. You can get some great insurance through Boat USA. I think it's like $175 a year for like the gold package towing plan. I have that because it's quite, you can imagine it's quite expensive to get towed. But so anyway, I think it turned out great. To me, the takeaways were particularly on the repair piece. This is, as I was thinking about this is like, you have some damage in your house, maybe a pipe breaks and there's water damage, and then you got to call somebody to sort of come in and fix it. And it's really the skill of the craftspeople who come in and do these repairs is the key. It's sort of their knowledge, their experience, and their skills. And I think one of the things that I would sort of ask in a situation like this is, have you done this before? Right? Have you done a keel cracking repair before? And what are the key things you got to look for? How do you know what to do? And just sort of really probe their experience. And oftentimes in a marina, depending upon the size of the marina, you may be talking to a project manager who's not actually going to be the person doing the work. And so you may want to, it's like taking your car to a repair place, right? You talk to the service manager, but the person out in the back who's doing a repair is different. And I think in a boat repair, you may, if possible, want to talk to the individual or individuals who are going to be doing some of the work, and just make sure you're comfortable with it, because you don't want to have doubts about that piece. And talk to them about the process. How does the process work? What things can I expect to happen? How will we communicate? How will you keep me up to date? Just sort of you got to sort through all that stuff, which I think is pretty interesting. I thought the other key takeaway that Mark had was, after the boat was all repaired, he didn't venture far away. He went for sort of a short sail around it wasn't like, okay, the boat's fixed, they put it in the water and we're going up for a 8-hour sail in the opposite direction, and we're not coming back here. So he sort of hung around to make sure that there's nothing wrong and nothing needs to be fixed, and everything the repair was well done. So I think that's another sort of important lesson. Don't be on a schedule, and if the boat gets put back in the water, whether it's engine repair or fiberglass repair or whatever, hang around the place for a while and use the boat and shake it down and make sure everything's good and to your liking before you sort of venture off and leave the area.
Yeah, I totally agree. The other thing that I thought was really interesting was the insurance component. And his experience with his company was very tech-driven and automated and easy. But to me, insurance is so important. I mean, this is, a lot more expensive than your typical automobile. And in some cases, more expensive than people's houses, right? And it seems like the insurance part is really important. What are your thoughts and experiences with insurance, and how do you see some of these automated tools both helping and hurting in the sailing space?
Yeah, I think that, you're right. Insurance is important. And luckily haven't had any insurance claims. So I haven't had that experience yet of sort of diving into it. And the insurance market is interesting. There's a couple of really big players in the insurance business for boat insurance. And I think they're very automated. They have great, apps on your phone that you can do stuff. And if you think about it, it helps them save money because they don't have to send a person out, right? Sending an adjuster out to look at the damage and assess the damage is very expensive from their part. So if they can gather all the information from pictures that you take in an automated app, some descriptions you make, and they may be able to come up with a really darn good estimate of what the repair is going to take. So I think, they work. I think it's good. Some people get comfort in talking to an individual. I tell you, I just hate calling, a 1-800 help number and then having to go through some automated or semi-automated set of questions to figure out how to land me to the right person. That's just, put me to the person right away. I hate that stuff, but that's me personally. And I think the smaller insurance companies, they may not have such a set of tools, and that's okay. I think they both work. But in general, I think most insurance things, particularly if you stick with the larger companies, they do a pretty good job.
Yeah. My sense is when the system works well and you get what you think you deserve, having an automated system is awesome. And I think if the automated system works in such a way that you get less than what you think you deserve, then it might be more trouble than it's worth in some ways, right? To go through and whether if you just would have talked to a person who would have explained it to you clearly in the first place, you wouldn't have had to go through a lot of problems. But certainly the technology from my end in general, the AI-driven chatbots and these decision-making algorithms and things like that have a lot of potential to be more accurate, but it's only as good as how they're trained, right?
Right.
And they can eliminate some biases, but they can create some other biases. So we're really embarking on a whole new world in the last, I mean, this has been developing for 30 years. You and I are no strangers to AI and kind of how it's developed literally for decades now. But there's just been this explosion in the last year or so. And it's even impacting the sailing business because, right, these insurance tools are driven by AI in a lot of ways. And there's algorithms driving what gets approved and for how much. And it's great to hear an example that they're working. I'm sure we'll probably get a little bit of mail or a little bit of traffic, right, on maybe people who've had really bad experiences. And we're open to that. That'd be really interesting to hear, you know, what are the pros and cons of these types of approaches. But certainly not playing phone tag. For me, it's really hard for me to take a phone call. My day is so busy, right? And I have between classes and students and meetings, I'm not just sitting around able to answer the phone 98% of the time. I'm not sitting at my desk. So something like that for me would be great if it works, right? And if it's if there's an escape hatch, right? If it's not working or I'm frustrated, can I get a hold of a person within 5 rings, right? Or can I put a message in and they'll call me back at a time that works for me, right? Because I'm the customer. So things like that. But I thought it was really interesting to hear that part. I mean, that was a small part of the story, right? But I thought that was kind of an interesting shift in the space, that he could do all that just by taking some pictures and some videos and quickly and efficiently got what he believed was the rightful amount reimbursed. I thought that's cool.
Yeah. And I think that, you got to think through what's the relationship between the insurance company and the place that's doing the repair, because sometimes as they tear things apart, they find other things. So how is the insurance company going to deal with that? So I think you want to make sure you ask that question, right? Because they're going to give you an estimate, and the repair place is going to give you an estimate. Okay, great. That all agrees, but you never know what gets uncovered. So how do the anomalies get taken care of?
And this is where you shouldn't be firing all your people, right? The people that work for you, these people who do estimates and adjustments and things like this, they get assigned to these challenging cases so you can get through those much faster, right? I think you still need the same amount of workers, but you really cut down the amount of time that people have to wait. And your customers are more satisfied. And I think your repair places are more satisfied because they're getting paid faster. And higher customer satisfaction should result in more business to these companies that can master these tools, because it's just the thing when they uncover it, that doesn't go back into the automated system. That's, I know who to call, and I call them, they're like, yeah, you're right. Or, right. Let's fix this,
Right. Trying to figure out where to draw the line on what's handled by an individual and a phone call and what's handled by some automated system. Right. That's one of the big challenges. Where do you draw that line? And, taking an individual and being able to make them more efficient and effective by using their expertise where it's really needed and not having them to spend time on the mundane tasks. That's a great application for technology and AI and all of those things. And, we've go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and saving the driving, these people would normally drive out in a car, right? To your boat, right? So not only is it saving time, but it's better for the environment and less accidents and all of these things that go along with it. There's lots of things that add up in these types of improvements.
Yeah, they sure do. Well, all right. Hey, do you think it's time to wrap this one up, Mike?
Let's wrap it up. Great conversation. And I was really interested to learn about this whole repair and towing and repair process and the insurance that Mark went through. So thanks to him for sharing with us. Listeners, hope you found it interesting and thought-provoking as we did. Thanks for joining us for yet another episode. And if you have questions about what we've discussed, please get in touch with us. Our email is, as usual, sailingtheeast. That's still all one word at gmail.com.
Hey, and if you enjoy the podcast, hit that follow button on your podcasting application. And if you know of someone that would be a good guest for the show, reach out to us and let us know, and we'll try to convince them to come join us for an episode. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.
And from over here in Münster, Germany, as we say in German, auf Wiedersehen. Bye-bye.
Okie doke.
Okie doke.